Ableton, and it received some attention mostly from people wondering how do you make mixes in Ableton, and what is the best way to do that, and what are some common pitfalls, and how does it differ from making a mix to perform on CDJs, and what are the pros and cons. And I decided that since I'm working on a mix right now, it's called Ecteus, and by the time you see this video, it will be out, to speak extemporaneously or pseudo-extemporaneously on the topic as I work. So I'm just going to show you a little bit about how I would normally go about making a mix in Ableton. I cannot, in fact, answer the question of what's the best way to do it, because I don't know the best way to do it. This is just how I learned to do it for myself and what conceptually made sense to me when I first started doing them. So let's get into Rekordbox, because that's where the whole process starts. So this is the mix here that I'm working on currently, and I'm not going to get too much into how to determine which songs to play when and whatnot, because that's a different video. But more mechanically, this is how I set up Ableton when I get started. So I started making these mixes as derivations of live sets. So when I started making them, my thought was just to structure it like I would structure a live set. So 1, 2, 3, and 4 here are just 4 decks. That just seemed the way that it made the most sense to me. And then I will apply effects based on what I need to do with the sends and returns. So we'll get into more of that later. So the first thing I would do is, whatever the first song is that I'm going to play, throw it in here, do some warping if I need to. Obviously, this one was native at 140, so it wasn't a problem. And when it comes time to play the next track, I will lay it over here in Ableton, and you'll notice each of these has 2 things on it. They each have an EQ with a few settings, which we're going to talk about, and they have a utility, which I just use to turn it down 3 decibels. A lot of the songs can obviously be louder than others, but more than that, you can get issues with stretching songs where they come out a little bit louder or quieter based on the stretching and what's going on in the algorithm. It's very complicated, and I don't fully understand all of it. But songs can become louder when you stretch them, and so to make sure that everything works, I've just given myself some headroom. So each channel has an EQ and just a down gain, and then there's some extra effects on this channel. We'll talk about that later maybe. The way that I like to set these EQs up, and I'm just going to duplicate this so I don't mess up anything because this is still a work in progress, is I keep a low cut here by 4 that I can use to cut out sub when I'm doubling or layering things. It's very effective for that. I like to keep a low shelf that I'll use sometimes. There's a bell somewhere in the middle for boosting or cutting if I need a certain frequency, and then a high shelf that I usually keep on a pretty low Q, to be honest, usually even lower than what I had it at, just to gradually bring up the highs or lows as they're affecting if one part of the song is like a lot of cymbals and it's just a lot in the mix. And then finally, this, just a high roll-off, but a gentle one, not a by 4, because usually if I'm using that, it's to bring a song in or out of the mix smoothly, and so it's just more gentle. It's better in that regard. So I will set up an EQ with all of those filters on it, just stock, not, at 0 gain, not actually doing anything. And I will duplicate it to each track so that all 4 decks are identical. And then when it comes to the time where I need to make a transition, it's all about automation. Automation is the name of the game here. So in this case, it looks like I've chosen to not automate anything on the first song and just let this outro play out. And on the second one, I have a low cut here. I'm going to turn the volume down. I think it's going to be a little loud. There we go. So I just have the very lowest of the sub cut out here, just so it doesn't interfere with the low end on this one. And you should see, yep, the sub come in gradually. So all I've done there is move the cutoff of this, and to be honest, I'm going to move it like that. Move the cutoff of this so that it sweeps down when I want the low end of this song to come in, obviously. And the cue is static. Perfect. The automating these on and off is really the most tedious part, because I don't want that EQ to just sit there kind of manipulating the lows right there, because that you can get ringing issues and stuff. It's a whole thing. If you're not using something, especially something sharp like this on an EQ, it is best to turn it off rather than just leave it on and all the way out of the auditory spectrum, because it's still affecting things. So I just turn it off, but I sweep it below the audible spectrum by then. It's down to 21 hertz, so we should be pretty safe to get any clicking or anything like that. Now, this is basically now just the song, and we have this song playing. I bring in a low cut here because we've traded the low end, so it's mechanically identical to swapping the low end on two tracks, just adding one and removing the other, although there isn't much low end on this. And then the other thing I'm doing is much like I would be using the effects section or the color effects, probably color effects. I really like the color effects. Space is the best one, and no one can tell me it's not. Over here on the top right, you will see that I have a ramp for the reverb send. So what this is doing is sending a signal anywhere from starting at 0, obviously, all the way up to, what do we have? Negative 4.1 decibels. So 4 decibels lower than what this is playing. It is sending to this reverb. And you can manipulate this reverb and make it sound different, but I kind of like to keep it consistent. And if I need a different reverb, I'll usually set up a second or an extra send return channel, so I can do this with a different reverb. So this is slowly adding an amount of reverb. So if you just listen to this part of the track, it fades out a lot cleaner than it would be if you just cut that song to 0 volume, even though that's functionally what I'm doing. I'm cutting it to 0 pretty quickly here. The reverb gives it just a little bit of a tail to fade into the background, and now we're into a new song. It's just that easy. Time to get into another song. Well, let's do the same thing. Looks like I wanted to emphasize around 100 hertz here. And yeah, the sub here has a nice thumping that I wanted to preserve. And we've actually got 2 subs going on here, so this is something I'm probably going to have to handle later on. But the way that I will construct these mixes is one song after the other, trying to find something that fits, build it in. If I need to do things like this, where there's a cut in where the song, because this continues, right? But I'm cutting to an extra out point here. This is just the same as hitting a hot cue. When you're listening to it, the song's playing, and then all of a sudden it jumps to a different part in the song. That's just a hot cue. So I could do this live. I could do this EQ and the reverb live. I could even do this, although it might be a little more effort. And if there was something that I really wanted to do live that I found that I couldn't, I would just do it in Ableton first and export it as an edit and do that, right? So essentially, the idea for me and my philosophy is I want the mix to be the purest, cleanest representation of what it might be like to see me live. But I'm pulling almost everything I'm playing in these mixes from live sets that I've done in the last 6 months to a year, with the idea that, at least for me, when you listen to one of my mixes, it sounds, maybe cleaner and sharper than I could do live, because obviously I'm going to make a mistake at some point. I try and do complicated stuff, as it's not easy. In my opinion, if I'm doing stuff that's all easy to do, I'm not challenging myself, and there's probably a way that I could improve the listener experience by trying to do something more interesting. So I want to find that thing and do it. Otherwise, what am I really doing, right? I'm just I found all the songs, but then when I'm there, I'm just kind of there. I would rather be doing a thing. So all of these mixes are really clean and whatever else, but they're all old. And when stuff goes into the mix, I generally, not my own music, but in general with like certain doubles and stuff that you'll hear later, I pseudo-retire them, right? Or they at least go on hiatus. Like, I'm not going to play that mix again in a live set 2 weeks after I dropped it in the mix, because you can already go listen to it in the mix if you wanted to hear it. And maybe you come to the show and you were really excited to hear that, and then I didn't play it. Well, just go home and listen to the mix, man. I don't know what to tell you. I'm going to try and bring an hour of interesting stuff that I haven't shown you before, ideally. So obviously, it's my own music. I'm going to play it. There's nothing you can do about that. I like it. If I didn't, I wouldn't release it. So it is a lot of rinse and repeat of that concept, right? And usually the long-term methodology outside of Ableton is that I try and do that. And sidebar, definitely don't do those often. It is also very fun in Ableton to do really fast mixes. Like, fun fact, this mix I actually did live. I did this at the Eptic show in Spokane. It was very fun, and it went pretty well. Sounded good. But you can just do this in Ableton if you want to mix really quickly. From here, when I introduce the second song only plays for, well, a very brief amount of time. That's not long at all. What's that? Almost 8 minutes. So like 35, 40 seconds. About 40 seconds, and I'm already into another song. The reason I'm doing this in this specific example is because this is in one key, which is compatible with this, and this is gorgeous, by the way, some amazing guitar in it. Go listen to the mix if you want to hear it. And then this is in a key compatible with this, so I can use this outro over the intro and guitars here that sound great. And then this drops out, this builds up, and in that time, these chords are swelling. You can see I've also automated the volume here to sweep up, and the low end is cut out on here. So you get all of this build in here, and then when this drops out, and it has a whole bunch of reverb on it, because that's what these are, they're two different reverbs. I'm going to flatten that. Interestingly enough, this one is a short one, and then this third one is a much longer one. If you take a look, this reverb, 2.5 second decay. This reverb, more open on the EQ, much longer, 22 second decay, and then it feeds into a 50% dry wet. So it's a cathedral that I've touched up a little bit from Ableton stock cathedral into a dark hall at 50% dry wet, or 43, because dark hall cuts out a lot of the highs, and I didn't want to lose all the highs, but I wanted that richness that you get from this reverb. It's my favorite reverb. And then into an EQ that I don't remember why I did that. Let's see. Yes, it's only open for that section. So the reverb must have been interfering with this swell, and so I've EQ'd the reverb, and then obviously when we get to this point, that turns off. I'm going to turn all those off just because. The other thing that I'm automating a lot while I'm doing this, thought of another thing I wanted to say. That's probably going to happen during these non-scripted videos, get used to that, is something like this. Again, there's this song actually does this, and it has a vocal sample here. I didn't want to play that vocal sample because it implies that there's a drop right here, and I wasn't putting a drop right there, so I didn't want that massive spike in energy. I wanted to hit this and let the reverb, wash down into these lovely chords that then build up into their own drop. So it's a way of sort of resetting the energy and establishing this as the new bass key after we just did some key jumping. The other thing that I manipulate a lot and automate a lot is the master. We're not going to worry too much about the mastering chain. I mean, you can look at it. It's not like there's any secrets in there. It's pre-tweaking, so don't worry too much about it. But what I was going to say when I started this sentence 20 minutes ago is the tempo. So you can automate the tempo in Ableton, and furthermore, you can set bounds for the tempo. And so normally my mixes only go from 120 to 175. That's like a normal range for me. So I'll usually set this ahead of time, but maybe not. And we use these moments of like this big swell and build into another build. That's a great time because the energy is rising here. So that's a great time to increase the tempo. We can use moments like this where there's just a little bit of trail down on the end, and this song hasn't quite come in yet because it's still buried in reverb and it's got an EQ on it, to bring the energy back down by reducing the tempo. And in this way, you see that we can go anywhere we want in this mix. We can start at 140, come up to 145, dive to 120 in what looks like a very short amount of time, but this is all soft outro-y stuff, so it feels pretty fine. And we can get all the way up to, what's 175? Yeah, 174 for some drum and bass and some bouncier stuff over here. And as long as you're tactical with where you're placing those and make sure that the tempo changes are coming with momentum or energy changes in the music, then they can feel like they fit, and you can hide them in gaps and all sorts of stuff like that, which maybe I'll talk about at some point if people are curious. But that's the main methodology for it within Ableton. Here's another thing I was going to say before I interrupted myself. I will make a section of the mix, maybe 10 minutes. Maybe I'll get all the way up to junk mail here. And I'll throw that on. I'll export that whole bit to the left of it and put it on my SoundCloud, private. And I will listen to that probably 3 or 4 times a day. The important thing about that being, I'm listening to it to hear what sounds good and sounds bad, right? But when you make a mix, you're not only making each song sound good with the song you're layering it with, because like this obviously can take some EQ work and whatever, but even if you get all of those sounding good, you're not making transitions. You're making a mix. So the way that I understand it, or the way that I think about it, is the product is not these and the crate digging, right? Because crate digging can be a product. If you crate dig well enough, you can just show that to someone and it's awesome. The transitions aren't the product. If you do transitions clean enough, you can show that to someone and that's real cool. But the product that you're making when you make a mix is a mix. And you need that to be one cohesive item, right? And if you want energy changes and flows in there, you can do that. I'm not saying it has to be the same all the way through, but you want it to be one project. You want it to feel like one project. So I think that it is a huge mistake to think about music too technically, and I am 100% the person that does this quite a lot, is thinking about music too technically and trying to step back and experience it more as like an art. But the point I'm trying to get at is that you need to listen to the mix continuously. You need to listen to it from the front to the end, or from the front to wherever you are as you're working on it and sort of building it out, and see, how does it flow? How does it feel? For instance, I can tell you right now, this does not feel good. This whole bit where I go from observe to the hunter-seeker double, I like this, but then going from the hunter-seeker crank and double straight into the second drop of hunter-seeker, it feels bad. And the reason I did it is because I really wanted to use this outro, because I really like it, and I thought it did a nice job of flattening the energy from double and then heavy song and then double. It does a nice job of bringing it down to a place where I feel comfortable grabbing this and dropping the tempo a bunch, because this next song I wanted to play is 120 BPM, and I needed to get from here to here, and this was the way that I found to do that. Upon review, energy feels way off, does not feel smooth, does not feel good, and I'm going to get rid of it. So this isn't going to be in the mix. By the time this video is out, that's already not in there. But I wouldn't have known that if I only listened to it here in my chair. I need to be on my commute. I need to be grocery shopping. I need to be anywhere that I would normally be listening to a mix or listening to music to feel those weird energy shifts. Well, that was annoying, but you get my point, right? I wouldn't notice these things if I wasn't listening to them regularly, right? Because the only reason this is bad is because we go from high energy double to heavy song to high energy double to heavy song to high energy double, and then we go to this weird limp thing before dropping all the way down to here, and then it's heavy again. So this bit just doesn't feel right, but it sounds fine. The transition sounds good in my opinion. I would use this, but this isn't the time to use it. So instead, I'm going to be cutting that. The most important thing in making a mix is making sure that it functions as a mix. And I did a video recently where I talk about, it's a scripted video, so it'll be less rambly than this, where I talk about practicing with your ears and how it's really important when you're learning to DJ to listen to music outside of mixing, because if you only listen while you're mixing, you're distracted by the mixing, right? If you only listen to music or mixes in Ableton that you're making while you're in front of Ableton, you're in a different headspace. You're thinking about Ableton and you're thinking about how the songs flow and how all of that works, but you don't need to be thinking about that. I mean, you do need to be thinking about that. That's important, but you also need to make sure that you're setting aside time to think about, how does it feel when I get to the 45-minute mark? Have I been going straight bangers for 45 minutes? And is that what I want the mix to be? And maybe it is. And if it is, that's great. Then that can be your mix. But if you make an entire mix and then you release it and you're like, oh God, I played like 2 breakdowns the whole mix. It was just go, 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 go. That might be awesome for a gym mix, but if you were trying to make a promo mix to send out to promoters to play some festivals this summer, many of them might not be into that, right? So it's not about making sure the mix is correct. It's about making sure the mix represents you and the mix is doing the things that you wanted it to do. And when you're making it, you're just not in a good position to be observing that, right? You're not in a great position to notice those things. So make sure you listen to your mixes very regularly outside of creating them. So that was step 1. The basic plan is that you do this, and this I call blocking. You're blocking out the mix. You're making basic. One of these days I'll learn to talk. You're making basic edits to the EQ and the volume and the reverb and stuff to try and make it flow how you want it to work. And then at the end, you are exporting the whole thing and listening to it regularly. Whatever regular means to you and your schedule, listen to it regularly. And you will mark out sore spots, and instead of doing anything about it, don't take yourself out of the mix. Just write down a note or use your notes app in your phone. What I like to do is send myself a Facebook message, because then when I get home, I see a bunch of Facebook messages from me, and I can go, oh, okay, these are all the things I need to do. And bonus points, when I'm done dealing with one, I can delete the message, and it just leaves my list. So it's like having a little to-do list, right? So I'll send myself notes for music ideas and double ideas I have while I'm out and about. But one of the things I'll do is send myself a note that says 22 and a half minutes in, double sounds really muddy in the low mids or whatever. That's a problem to deal with later. Dealing with the problem is not the mindset I need to be in. I need to be an observer, a listener, and get to that part in the mix and go, if this was a mix that somebody else had produced and released, I would go, ugh, that part didn't sound great. And then when I get a chance to sit down and see my notes, I go, oh, okay, 22 minutes. That's this part, and it's muddy in the low mids, and I can listen to it and see if I can find a way to fix it. Usually EQ is plenty. And so then I go through all of those steps. I finish the blocking. I have manipulated the EQs so that each transition on its own, just in a bubble, each transition sounds good. The songs layer how I want them to. They are the relative volumes to each other, and there are no clashing frequencies. And once I have that, then it's time for a volume pass. And I'm sure that there are way, way better ways to do this. But one of the things I will do is I will take a level meter and I will take a loudness meter. And I will drop it, and I've kind of just worked out the settings that I like to use over time just for a sound that I'm pretty happy with. So you can tweak this and figure it out in whatever sounds good to you. Some people like stuff more compressed, some people don't, whatever. But I will start, while I'm working on the mix, this is what I have on it. And then when I'm finally getting ready to finalize, I will use this to tell how loud each drop is based on both LUFS and this RMS level meter. And I will try and, I don't have one yet, but I will use a utility to just, because again, at this point, I've established that each transition sounds like how I want it to sound. But you always run into those problems of, oh, why does this song sound like twice as loud as the other ones? Twice as loud, sounding twice as loud in this case, only 3 decibels. But 3 decibels is a big deal, right? So I put a utility here, and I will go through the entire mix, song by song, and I will use my ears and my eyes. Don't just use your eyes. Don't mix to an even point on here where everything looks the same, and then you're listening back to it and it sounds wonky. Trust your ears first, right? But we're going to use our eyes as a vehicle to get us there and go through each drop. And I say, I want all the drops, all the loud parts, to be about the same volume. So I will go through and I will figure out where I want it to be. Maybe on this one, it's peaking somewhere between -1 and +1. And I'll also look at LUFS. This song is a bit quieter because it's mine and I'm not a professional, right? I'm just me. But that's great. It's a good thing to be. So I will figure out how loud I want that to be. Maybe I want that drop to be a little louder. And so I will start that song a little louder. And then I will get to this drop. And let's say this drop is, well, now this song is real loud, so I need this to be quieter. So I will go to the front of the drop, and again, we're just winging locations here, and I will pick another spot just for now, and I will lower it to the point where I go, okay, that is how loud I want this drop to be, maybe somewhere around there. And then I will figure out how I'm going to get there. So where's a good point to reduce the volume? This is not a bad point because it's right when the second song comes in. And in fact, I would probably in this case do it like this. Fun fact, Ableton fact, if you hold Alt, you can draw curves. So I'll do a drastic example. This is a straight line. Hold Alt and you can drag this line up or down to make these curves, right? Use this all the time. And then secondary on that is if you want an S curve, you can make one of these that is exactly the distance you need, click right in the middle, and then bend that one down and that one up. This is a great way to hide things like tempo changes because it feels smooth at the beginning. It doesn't immediately launch the tempo, and then as it goes, you'll get through it even better when there's not drums because the drums help remind you what the tempo is. So especially if there's just vocals or chords, this is great. And then it smooths out before the end, so it sort of lands you. It uses the last little bit to land you into the new tempo. So by the time you hit here and the drums go or whatever, your brain is prepped for that. You're ready. That was completely unrelated, but fun fact. So in this case, what I would probably do is, right now here we're going from one song to two songs very quickly. So I would probably bend this down a fair ways. So I don't know if you can see it. It sharply descends, where from here we're at 228. After one bar, we're already at 161. So we're a good 2/3, 3/4 of a decibel quieter just in one bar. And then it'll gradually, slowly reduce itself down to where I needed this drop to be, right? And we're going to set something up like that and we'll go, that's good enough for now. Then we will go to the next song, figure out how loud is that drop and how loud do I want it to be. This is Nossphere. His stuff's going to be quite loud. And I like it, but I don't want it to be twice as loud as my own song, right? It's going to make my own song sound bad. So instead, I will take it, turn it down just a little bit so it matches the other song, and then again, find a place, let's say here, where I want it to be this volume up until then, and then start descending here. These tails, great places for energy changes. Build-ups are great for it. You want to do it when the song is naturally moving from place to place over 8 or 16 bars. You can mask a lot of tempo or volume changes gradually, and it feels like just part of the song going from here to here. If you do it in a part of the song, I don't know why I did it like that, YMCA. If you do it at a point where the song is just repeating the same 2 bars for like 8 or 16, and it's just like a fun little groove section, well, it's going to be really obvious that it's changing because the only thing that's changing is the volume or the tempo. But if you add it to all of these other natural changes already in the song, it feels like it comes with the song a lot more. So we do a bunch of those. We do a bunch of volume adjustments. Maybe this song's quiet and we want to bring it back up. Something like that. And then, yet again, we export it and we listen to it. And I'm listening to the entire mix front to back and just taking notes on parts that I don't like, parts that aren't perfect for me. And maybe I don't find ways to squash all of those parts because we're in pretty deep at this point. If I decide at this stage, oh, I don't actually like this double, I'd like to get rid of it, well, I'm kind of in trouble, aren't I? I got to find a way to get from here to here, and all this stuff is built around it. But there's ways to do it. I've done it before. The final stage, once I've done all that, is I'll usually have a light compressor on it. This right now is designed just to catch a tiny amount of compression very gradually on sections of the song, like an entire... Where's a good example? I don't know if I have one. This one. This is an entire double, quite loud, that then goes into this, which is going to be a fair amount quieter. It doesn't look like it, but it is, trust me. I wrote the song, I know. So this compressor is just sort of evening that out. I probably take this off once I've finished doing all the volume leveling. Because then ideally, anything that this does that I needed to do, if something was slightly too loud, slightly too quiet, I've dealt with it manually. So I can get rid of that. I'll take this off on the final export, but I'm just using it to sort of see my RMS. G-clip is always important, a little bit of softness, because there are going to be peaks, right? Inevitably, there are going to be peaks. I'm warping songs, I'm doubling songs, I'm doing all sorts of stuff. There's reverb involved. It's going to go over the natural maximal loudness of the original song, which is probably somewhere around 0. So in order to deal with that, the first thing I did, as you saw earlier, was we reduced everything by 3 decibels so that we gave ourselves some headroom. And then this is the point where we can boost stuff up. So what I'll usually end up doing by the end is, I already had it, I'll add a second utility and I'll look at the whole mix, and the whole mix is almost everything is averaging about -1 decibels, but there's 1 or 2 points that get up to like 0. We'll just say 0 for sake of argument. I might push the entire mix by half a decibel, because now the entire mix is averaging, in the drops, about minus 0.5 decibels, and that bit that was at 0 is now at positive 0.5, and I've just got G-clip to chop off the top a little bit. There is a balance to be had between compression and clipping and distortion affecting the quality of the songs versus an understanding that a lot of the music I'm playing is incredibly distorted already, and probably half of these tracks have been run through a G-clip at some point in their production. So it's about your ears. This is one where the eyes can't help you. You just have to listen to the mix and listen to it distorted. If you aren't sure and you're struggling with this, make 3 renders. Make a render that you think is about appropriate, and then -2 decibels and +2 decibels. Render all 3 of those, listen to them, and see which one sounds about right. But then you want to dial it in, right? It's like going to the optometrist. It's which one is better, 1 or 2. So once you figure out, ooh, 0 sounded pretty good, -2 sounded way too quiet, +2 also sounded pretty good but a little bit distorted. Now you can do 0, 1, and 2. And see if 1 sounds better. And then if 1 sounds better, now you can do 1, 1.5, and 2, right? And find the sweet spot of where it sounds good and it sounds nice and loud and crunchy, but it doesn't sound all distorted and you ruin your sub bass. If you are doing this, I would highly recommend testing it on something that has good low-end response, because the low-end distorting is probably one of the first things you're going to notice. So a system that's really good at representing that, and if you're A/Bing a lot of these things, it can also be helpful just to listen to some music. Listen to the music you used in the mix, or some similar music in similar genres on the system before you listen to your mix. Do like a good 15 to 20 minute lab on some tracks you like, and you get the volume set up on the system, and you're like, this is how loud this sound system is, and this sounds good, and all these songs sound good right here. And then you play your mix, and you want it to be the same, right? Because if those are songs you like, you probably want your mix to sound like songs you like. Go ahead and give it a listen and see if it sounds more or less distorted or waffly or whatever, and you can try and identify and deal with the issues from there. So it'll probably go through a G-clip, and then I've got an ozone imager on here. This is more for monitoring. Again, this is probably going to come off when I'm done, but it's nice to have. And then the last thing is the loudness meter, which again does get turned off before the final export. So I can use that along with the level meter to see where I'm at. That is essentially the methodology. It's mostly automation and listening to it over and over again to try and identify issues, which interestingly enough is also kind of how I produce, which is why a lot of my songs take so long to finish, which they're coming. I've finished half of the next EP and I'm working on the rest of it and I'm making good progress. I feel good about it, but I want to get this mix out to you people because I feel like you'll appreciate it, and I feel like it's time. Some of the stuff I do in this mix I've been doing live for like a year. Oh, that's what I was going to say. That's what I was going to say 45 minutes ago. Is that the mix is full of the things I've been doing for the last year, right? Live, sometimes a little more, so that if you listen to it, it's super exciting, and then you come see me, and I've done a bunch of new stuff, right? And so it's a whole new experience, and then the best parts of that new experience, you'll probably get to hear those in a mix in about a year, right? So the mixes are highlight reels, basically, of all the stuff I've come up with, and the sets are what I'm doing and working on right now, which is going to include some of the future stuff. I think that is everything that I have to share about making mixes specifically in Ableton. Keep in mind, as I said at the beginning, there's no correct way to do this. This probably isn't even close to the most efficient or good way to do it. I have no idea how other producers do this. I've actually never talked to anyone about how they go about doing this. But this is a system that I developed after probably 6 to 8 years of DJing, and then wanting to release mixes online but not having the equipment to do so. This is what I came up with. So if you have another method that you use, I would love to hear about it. Definitely drop some comments. And if you have any questions specifically on how this works, absolutely let me know. I would love to dive into that as much as possible. So let me know, and I'm 100% there. The next EP will be out when it's done, as most things are. But until it's done, I have one single out. I'm going to drop this mix, and then I believe I'm going to drop the next... So, you know what? Fuck it. I'll decide it right now. I'm going to drop the second single 2 weeks after the mix comes out. Who knows? You can't hold me to that part, but I will release a second single, and then I'll release the rest of the EP. Until then, good luck.